Can you please take your seats? Yeah. So networking is going on. That's a good thing, but please be seated. Our next speaker, and we are very happy to have Annemiek Nijhoff of Deltaris to give a short keynote. Annemiek.
Working. Yes, it's working. Well, thank you so much. I really love Delta areas, but that's because I was born in the Netherlands. And my parents brought me to the sea when I was young and to the little island of Terschelling. So where I lost part of my soul on the beach, and I have to go back there 3 times a year to find it back and to become a whole person again. And I also, I think I never disclosed it, but when I was a kid, I was quite a good swimmer. So once won even a competition in swimming. So I did this 5 days a week. And when you are born after 1953, water in the Netherlands is almost always a pleasure. It's something to look forward. It's about sports. It's about the paintings on the wall. It's about the poems that inspire you. But we, of course, we know, looking across the boundaries around the world, and also last year very close by, that living in this area also comes with vulnerability. First, I would like to say something about the deep insight that the latest IPCC report gave us about the coupling systems. Because although I thought I knew a lot about the climate system and what's going on and the climate change debate, and also on the other hand on the debates and the policies on biodiversity loss, actually it really hits me in the face that we really need to understand how these systems come together. The system of the climate system, the ecological system, but also how the human system interacts with that, is creating difficulties, problems, but also is in charge or has the duty to deal with it. And it's very important that we also integrate the communities. And I saw you were all having a great time seeing each other. We are already a very alive and kicking community when it comes to Delta management, but I think we really have a challenge to bridge between these different systems, because we need this the deep understanding of this integration to deal with the challenges we're facing. And we do have some choices. We can just move on with what we are doing. It's also been stressed before. Or we could investigate system changes and bigger steps. We could just think about ourselves, protect ourselves. We have a fantastic situation here, having a heritage of almost 900 years of integrated water management. So, or we could just also take responsibility for how our welfare state led to big difficulties on other places in the world. And having said that, I have some key messages for you. I'll keep it short because you have a lot of speakers, so I come to the point. The first key message to this audience is mitigation, mitigation, mitigation. So we are here to talk about adaptation, resilient delta cities, but even in this, everything we do, we should ask ourselves the question, is this contributing to the mitigation challenge that we're facing? Also the soil system in delta areas, there are lots of opportunities and innovations going on that may contribute to lowering the energy consumption, lowering the energy use, the use of fossil fuels. So also our community should keep this top of mind and ask ourselves this question day after day. And then second, explore. Explore the solution space that is ahead of us. And what do we at Deltaris mention by solution space? It's actually the translation of the future developments that we try to predict with our deep insight in the systems, with our models, with our data sets, towards different futures, and then translate these future developments into timelines. How much time do we have, can we afford, before we have to change the pathway to the future? Where is this in time? Because we are facing in the Netherlands at this moment a very bad example of postponing action. We have the very painful situation with the farmers who are now forced completely or almost are erased from their activities because we didn't manage, also as scientists, also as the planning agencies, over 40 years to act in time. And we have to learn from that. With our knowledge, with the deep insights, comes the responsibility to knock on the door and to say, okay, don't postpone until we are sure about everything, because then we are lacking the time to do it in a proper, inclusive way. So that's also my message. We have to accelerate action. And this is difficult for people who like to do research and to know things for sure. It's also difficult for politicians who are smashed on their heads when they make a mistake. So we created a society in which we tend to postpone, to be sure, to investigate, to take more time. And I think this is, in the end, worse compared to making decisions in uncertainty and make mistakes. And I have been in this position when I was leading an engineering company. In business, this is completely different. You're just supposed to act in time to keep the confidence of your financing institutions and your stakeholders and your employees and the Works Council and the society and your clients. And you can't wait until you have the perfect plan. So you are moving forward and making mistakes. But at the end of the day, it's about survival. Are you able to create a healthy company, even if you made mistakes on this pathway? So I think we have to change our attitude when it comes to making mistakes and the way we treat public officers or politicians when they do so. Then, embrace an open knowledge society. And what this really sounds as an open door, being in this audience. But still, even also at Deltaris, I got the question, well, should we keep this research for ourselves or share this with someone else? Or not on the content level, but for example, are we teaming up and giving part of the turnover of this research program to another institution, or are we keeping it ourselves? And I was thinking about the captain in the aeroplane, because I've been working in safety in the chemical industry for some time, and then we said we were learning from the sector of the air transport, because the captain, as soon as they know something about safety, which concerns safety, for example, they are in the cockpit and they see that some meter isn't working well, they immediately inform everyone, all the competitors. This is about ethics. This is about not want to be responsible for a crash the day after in the aeroplane of your competitor with 300 people on board. So, when it comes to safety, competition is unethical. And I think we are in the same situation. We are on planet Earth, and planet Earth is about to have a crash. So if you encounter competition when it comes to knowledge sharing, opening up our experience sharing, just use this example and say, hey, so if you would be a pilot, would you let another one fall down with a plane? Because you know something is going on, you have to share it. So our motto is dare to share. But it's not only about presenting what we know. It's also opening up the windows, opening up the doors, opening up your mindsets for the knowledge and experience from others. And it's true, being so well defensed and well managed in the Netherlands is also creating the situation that our community of practitioners lacks experience when it comes to drafts, lacks experience when it comes to salination, or lacks experience in completely different situations otherwhere. So we have to have this open mind on learning. Then my last part is about leadership. Because this is actually all about leadership. And everyone is a leader in his or her own environment. And I was educated as a chemical engineer by education, and my research was about emulsions. And now probably you think, what the heck, what's relevance for this? But the interesting thing of emulsions is that it's a mixture of two fluids that can't mix. So you need something to put in this to create a stable new situation between two fluids that can't mix. And this is called the emulsifier. And actually I discovered after 30 years of working that this is, I'm not only a specialist in emulsions, but I am the emulsifier. I'd like to be the emulsifier. I like to mix fluids that can't mix. I like to mix business with science. I like to mix science with politics and with the civil servants. And I like to mix the government with the society. I like to bridge between engineering, being an engineer, with ecologists, by seeing how far we can get with nature-based solutions, and at the same time respect and invest in our engineering capabilities, in innovation. And I'd like to bridge between the change in behavior, which is essential and crucial. We have to redistribute our welfare. We have to rethink the way we are living in this extremely wealthy part of the world and what it causes, at what cost. But at the same time, I also like to invest in innovation and be positive about the opportunities that this will bring. I'd like to bridge between slowing down, because sometimes this is the best progress you can make, and speeding up, because we have no time to lose. And knowing what is the best strategy in the moment. I'd like to bridge the long-term approach, which is crucial. It has been perfectly illustrated this morning by other speakers, and with the short-term actionability and manageable actions. So I think I would like to stress one thing. Next year, the minister already pointed out, and some others, there will be this crucial conference, UN conference on water. And wouldn't it be great if this community a step forwards and says, okay, we are going to be the emulsifiers of the water sector and of this delta management. We are going to bridge between our deep insights, the system thinking, the long-term thinking, but also bridge between the money that is available for adaptation. I'm really becoming impatient about the fact that there is money and there is a huge problem, but apparently it's too tough to step forward and to accelerate adaptation action. My hypothesis is that it has to do with dealing with uncertainty. So I'm looking for brave leaders who step in and will stand even if they make a mistake, because doing nothing is the bigger mistake we can make. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Annemiek. Professor Hans Mommaas, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Annemiek, for this excellent introduction to my talk. Because I think I will present a plea for zooming in and zooming out, which is related to your plea for more systemic thinking. It's related to also for your plea to also include mitigation in this adaptation context in which we're talking about. It's also about jumping scales up and down. It's also about jumping time scales back and forward. And to do that in a way which is understandable and manageable. And then manageable in modern ways, in dynamic ways, in adaptive ways. And I think that also links into our work as PBL, as a National Strategic Institute for Nature, Space, and the Environment, and the type of strategic work that we do. So this is a plea for zooming in and zooming out, and at the same time keeping it manageable. Let me see whether this works. Oops. It doesn't. The lower button is backwards. The big one. Oh, I have to wait a few minutes. It will slow us down, which is actually a very good thing. So this gives you a brief overview of the type of work that we do, and it gives you an impression of this kind of systemic approach that we like very much in exploring the related issues of today. We do a lot of international work. We do a lot of work also for UN organizations. We are involved in the China Council, which is an advisory body for the Chinese government. We have done a scoping study for them, a special policy study, scoping study on river basins, global river basins, comparing them, and to see what kind of topics are there and how to handle them. So you know, it gives you an impression of the kind of systemic perspective, of systemic approach that we really would like to take, but also always from an actionable perspective. So how can you on the one hand, open up doors for complexity and diversity, and at the same time, keep them manageable? So not falling victim for the complexity. I mean, things can become so complex that you don't see any way through. So how can you, in a certain sense, level that complexity or manage that complexity in such a way that it really becomes actionable? And from that perspective, when we look at deltas, again, we broaden up, we zoom out. And we see deltas not just in relation to the sea, which is the obvious sort of perspective that you take, but we also look the other side, to the river basins, which in a certain sense produce these deltas. So if you look at the deltas from such a perspective, the deltas are really a sort of world where worlds meet. Different worlds meet. The physiological world meets there with the sea world, the river basins, the backyard, but also industrialization, urbanization. I mean, a lot of these rivers and the deltas are also centers of refinery industries. Loads of oil cargoes coming in and then refined, and the fossil-based products are moved out again to the backgrounds. And so they are facing a lot of issues, not just physical issues, but also industrial and economic issues. So from this systemic perspective, we invite you to zoom out and to look at deltas as interactive systems in their context. Not just in their physiological context, but also in their socio-economic context. A lot of these deltas are also givers of identities. They give their name to countries. They give their name to communities. So when we think about these deltas, we also immediately are thinking about communities, cultures. And that has to be included too, because otherwise we're going to make mistakes. So these deltas, and we already talked about that, are facing gigantic pressures. And the pressures are not just coming from the sea level rise. They're also coming down from the rivers. They're coming from the changing sediments dynamics. They're coming from the fact that the soils are shrinking, subsidence of soils. And the picture over there is one of the super pumps that we use in the locks of IJmuiden to pump out the water in our delta from North and South Holland and Utrecht. Two of the pumps had some problems with them, two of these pumps, and they had to be replaced. And that was, in a certain sense, a reality check. They are pumping out, I think, what is it? Let me give you the exact figures. They're pumping out 7 Olympic swimming pools each minute out of the Randstad area. If we stop doing that, we get wet feet. And we have to add more pumps more quickly. And the more we pump, the more water is coming in. So this is a vicious cycle. And in a certain sense, we have to rethink that cycle. And we have to rethink what we're doing here and whether that's sustainable for the future. Because indeed, as was said this morning, this is also linked to the center of economic activities in the Netherlands. And we in the Netherlands, in the Dutch Delta, we're also part of a northwestern European center of fossil economics. Refinery industries find their center here in northwestern Europe in this delta. So we're not just facing a physiological agenda, we're also facing a mitigation agenda, which takes us to the heart of our industries. So there are lots of pressures coming together in this delta system. And we have to face them all, because otherwise we get locked in to a certain approach, an engineering approach, which is forgetting all the other issues. And we are at a turning point here. Some people are discussing the fact that we are nearing tipping points. Because subsidence on one hand and rising sea levels on the other hand and the glacier melting on the other is producing a situation in which sediment formation will stop. And that will mean that the delta's formation will stop. So what are we going to do about this? When is the point there that we have to say, we have to rethink our urbanization processes? We cannot go on, in a certain sense, making Rotterdam safe. We have to be more drastic in our thinking through what to do with cities like the city of Rotterdam. So we are in need of a paradigm shift which takes us beyond the sort of engineering path to something else. And of course, we need new icons for this. And we don't have to start from scratch here. Because this all sounds very tough, but in a certain sense, we're already doing it. Because we have the new icons for the new sort of paradigm challenge that's there already. Room for the river, the water square in Rotterdam. All these issues are there. The sand engine outside of our coast. So we're already making the turn from thinking in the old sort of engineering style way to something which is much more nature inclusive, building with nature. And we have to move on from that perspective and see what we can do. So, not against engineering, but with engineering. Not against nature, but with nature. And combining these areas in creative ways of thinking. Scale here matters, and this is where I think we have to think through that complexity and translate it into something which is manageable. So we can try to figure out what the different challenges are within that umbrella of challenges. And see each challenge in its own sort of scale and its own temporal dynamics, short-term and long-term. From the neighborhood level, the building level, to something like the total river basin and what's happening in the dynamics of a Rhine system or a Meuse system as such. And then think them together and in a certain sense make programs which can combine all these issues. And that's indeed where I also subscribe to the plea for us as organizations, as knowledge organizations, to position ourselves much more as network organizations. Because we as network organizations have to, in a certain sense, deliver the coordination. We can have dozens of Delta commissioners, but they will not do it in themselves. We have to collaborate with one another to, in a certain sense, develop this complex agenda. So scale matters. Challenges have their own layer. There's scale and temporal dynamics. We have to disaggregate themselves and then recombine themselves again. The scales are interrelated. We need coordination beyond the blueprint approach, adaptive, a learning mode, up and down the scales. And that I think is the approach we should take. So, concluding, I would give you also 5 principles. And these are the principles that we have already expressed in our special policy report to the China Council, because we're doing this study on these different global river basins, the Mississippi, the Yangtze, the Rhine, and others. And we in that scoping study have formulated these sort of 5 guiding principles which you could take along to get this to this zooming out and zooming in dynamics. So make good on your responsibility, stretching from the headwaters to the deltas and the coastal areas. So don't take deltas as such, as isolated islands, but look at them in integration to what's happening in the river basins which are forming the deltas in the first place. Adopt a 100-year perspective and plan your steps, which has to do with if you're building these houses today, they will be there for 50, 100 years. So is it very wise to build in polders today if these houses will be there 100 years from now? What's clever here? So adopt a 100-year perspective. Engage everybody who can contribute and develop a shared vision, which is about stakeholdership, which is about institutions, which is about knowledge institutions working together in building that program. Adapt to climate change and other principal stresses in every aspect of the management of rivers and deltas. So don't just only look at water dynamics, but look at the entire sort of platform of problems or challenges which are there. And indeed, mitigation is linked to this, because in a certain sense, our deltas and harbors are very much based on a form of fossil economy. So if we turn to a renewable economy, what does that mean for the way we ship goods, we store goods, and we build our harbors? So adapt to climate change and other principal stresses in every aspect of the management of rivers and deltas, and continue to strengthen and innovate. So this should be an adaptive program. It should not be a blueprint-based program. It should be something which is open to a learning mode. And then indeed, for instance, the conference indeed next year, the UN Water Conference, could be a perfect stepping stone to, in a certain sense, build such a knowledge community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hans. I would like to request Professor Samuel Hoek to come to the stage, please.
Thank you very much, Chris. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to share 3 sets of remarks and thoughts, building on the conversations that we've heard already from the various speakers. The first one will be to take you through the progression that we have done in Bangladesh, not just in the delta planning, but in a larger sense of figuring out what we want to do, what we want to be, and how we want to get there as a country. And then the second set of remarks will be about my sense of what I feel the aspect of redesigning deltas needs to focus on, or at least I am interested in focusing on, and that is the people who live in the deltas, not the physical delta itself, but the people. And if we think about redesigning, then we're thinking about the next generation, young people. We need to have the young people living in deltas be very different from the old people who are there. And we need to figure out how that needs to be done. And we've had some conversations about how we need to rethink, how we have to have paradigm shifts. This all will require a new generation of citizens, educated citizens, to be able to fulfill those demands if we want to effectively fulfill what we are trying to do. And then the third set of remarks I want to do is to link this discussion with actually an ongoing discussion taking place just down, not very far from here in Bonn, in Germany, where they have the intersessional meeting of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. I was there, in fact, I came yesterday from Bonn. I was there for the first part of that. And there's a very important discussion going on there on something called the global goal on adaptation. which is under discussion now. And I'll share some thoughts on that, and something that I feel we might collectively think about, having a global delta adaptation goal as part of a global goal, because having one single global goal is unlikely to be something that we'll be able to agree to. It may have to be disaggregated into different goals, and deltas, and a delta goal might be something worth thinking about collectively. Okay, so let me start with Bangladesh, and Ambassador Riaz Hamidullah has already given us a very good description of the fact that Bangladesh has a 100-year, or less than 100-year now, Delta plan that was developed with a lot of support and inputs from the Netherlands, and many people here I know have all contributed to it considerably. The good news is that it's happened. We have the plan. We are taking it forward. I would characterize it as a process in which we have just embarked. And I will describe my take on how we have evolved as a country in our thinking about this issue. And in fact, our Prime Minister herself reflects this in her remarks when she speaks about this. The first part of what we used to think about ourselves was to focus on our vulnerability. Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries to the impacts of climate change, in particular in the context of climate change, but in other contexts as well. And then that was what we were aware of, that was what we were afraid of, that was what we focused our attention on, the problem of impacts of climate change, problem of floods, the problem of droughts, the problem of cyclones, and so on and so forth. And we've done a lot of research and work on that. In fact, many of our civil engineers in Bangladesh have studied in the Netherlands, in Delft. We have a long history of collaboration on water sector engineering in particular, and building our knowledge base and sharing what we have been doing on that. But now we have transitioned in the last few years from focusing on the problem and our vulnerability to solutions and adaptation to the problems and building our resilience. So we move from vulnerability to resilience. And you'll see in many of our documentation, our plans, it's about building resilience. It's no more focusing on our vulnerability. That was yesterday's problem. Today it's about building our resilience and looking at how we can build that resilience. And that has a component to do with the physical infrastructure, the ecosystems we live in. But more importantly, it has to do with our people. How do we make our people more resilient? And I would argue that Bangladeshi people are inherently very resilient. They are used to dealing with challenges and surviving those challenges and carrying on despite those challenges. And so how do we use that foundation and build on it? And the building on that, in my view, is about knowledge. The more knowledgeable our people are, the more resilient they are likely to be, compared to just relying on their own strengths and capacities that they inherently have, which is strong, but not enough for the problems of tomorrow. So how do we prepare them for the problems of tomorrow? And that's where I'll share my second set of remarks, where universities have a role to play. Bangladesh has more than 100 universities, if you count the public universities and the private universities, some specialized universities like agriculture and engineering and medical. That's a big asset. There's tens, if not hundreds of thousands of students in our universities. And one of the things that my center has done with a number of others over the last decade is we have set up a platform of universities and research institutes working on climate change related topics, which is very broad. It covers almost everything. We call it Gobeshona. Gobeshona is a Bangla word for research. And the platform now has well over 50 universities and research institutes. We have a website where we keep track of publications on climate change in Bangladesh. We have an archived data set of more than 2,000 publications that can be used by researchers. We have a monthly webinar, seminar series of researchers sharing their work. And then we do a big annual conference on bringing people together, several hundred people. We used to do it physically at my university. The last couple of years, because of COVID, we went virtual, but by becoming virtual, we also went global. And so this is now a global network of locally led adaptation. Our focus is very much on working with the most vulnerable people who already are adapting, by the way. So I used to call them the vulnerable people who will be affected by climate change, but now that climate change is already happening, as per the 6th assessment of the IPCC, these people are now already adapting, and they're learning how to adapt. And I would argue they know better how to adapt than any of us here, right? So we need to be learning from them, not teaching them. And so we have this huge knowledge resource, experiential knowledge resource of local adapters everywhere, including in the Netherlands and in Bangladesh and in the United States. Everywhere is being impacted by climate change. Local people are having to adapt. They are actually learning to adapt. And that knowledge, although every place is specific and every action is location specific, there is nevertheless some generic knowledge that can be shared, particularly in the how did you get things done? How did you do things? How did you get everybody together? How did you manage to get decision makers to make the right kinds of decisions? These are things that we can learn from each other, not the specifics of what they used in a particular place or the technology that they use. That's also usable, but in sharing that knowledge of the how to get things done. How do you bring people together to get things done? And so one of the things that we are planning to do in Bangladesh with our university network, in fact, we are collaborating with Wageningen University, and Catherine Tervisha is here from there, is to develop, they are developing a MOOC, online teaching platform for the Delta Plan of Bangladesh. And what we hope to do with the Gobeshona network is, first of all, test it in 10 universities with faculty and students. But after we've tested it in the 10 universities, we want to make this into a universal MOOC that every master's student in Bangladesh, that they don't have to be environmental masters. They can be studying English, they can be studying law, they can be studying Bangla, but they should do the MOOC on the Delta Plan of Bangladesh. So every master's student graduating from a university, any university in any subject, should at least understand what the master plan, the Delta Plan is of the country, their own country. It's the future of the country. It's their future. They need to be involved in it. They need to know what it is. They need to have a role in implementing it and finding out what they can do to make it happen. And this is where the final segue that we are trying to do in Bangladesh now. We are at the beginning of it and thinking about it. As I said, we move from vulnerability to resilience. Yesterday, vulnerability, today resilience. Tomorrow, we are using the term prosperity instead of resilience. And the difference between resilience and prosperity is resilience is still very much risk management, is knowing that we're going to be impacted by climate change, preparing ourselves, adapting ourselves, being ready for it. Prosperity is we will prosper despite those problems. We know they're going to come. We know we're going to have to deal with them. We will not let them defeat us. We will not just manage them. We will prosper despite them. And you may know this, but if you don't, there is a group of vulnerable countries, currently 55 vulnerable developing countries, called the Climate Vulnerable Forum. It was created over 10 years ago by then President Nasheed of the Maldives. When he was president, he brought together a number of these vulnerable country leaders. They formed this group. Over the years, there have been more and more members joining. Every 2 years, a leader is in charge. The last 2 years, Bangladesh was in charge. The Prime Minister of Bangladesh was the head of it. She has just recently handed over to the President of Ghana, so Ghana will be the leader for the next 2 years. But during her tenure in the last 2 years, she proposed this idea of every vulnerable country developing their own climate prosperity plans. And they have adopted that, and the vulnerable countries are now developing their own. Each one is their own development. This is not a top-down process. It's a bottom-up, nationally driven process. Several countries have started. Bangladesh is the first country to do a climate prosperity plan. It's named after the father of our nation, also the father of our prime minister. It's called the Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan. And it is very much about progressing in the next 10, 20 years in a transformational manner. It's an aspirational, transformational change plan, not just an incremental change plan. And I would invite you, I won't go into the details of it, but I'm happy to talk to anybody who's interested in it. But it does have some leaps forward in the thinking of how we might want to do that. But let me use my remaining couple of minutes to just talk a little bit about what's happening in Bonn. In the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, in the Paris Agreement, in Article 7 of the Paris Agreement, which is on adaptation, the vulnerable countries asked for, and they got, the desire to have a global goal on adaptation, similar to the global goal on mitigation, 1.5 degrees. But adaptation, as everybody here knows, is much more complex. There's no 1.5 equivalent of adaptation. So it's complicated. So now, in Glasgow, they've decided to spend some time thinking about it. So they've developed what they call the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work plan to discuss the global goal on adaptation for the next 2 years. So the next 2 years, there's going to be a lot of workshops and discussions around this, and I just attended the first one in Bonn last week. And the first thing, my view, this is what my impression, is there's not going to be a single global goal. We just, that's not possible. But there may be subsets of goals. Ecosystem-based, there's a group of mountain countries who are talking about a mountain ecosystem goal. But I didn't see the delta countries coming together and thinking of a delta adaptation goals. Something I would invite all of us here to think about and see whether we might be able to take this forward. And in the UNFCCC negotiations coming up to Sharm el-Sheikh COP27 and then COP28 after that, which will be in Abu Dhabi, this will be a big issue that I think, collectively, all of us who work on deltas, both on the research side as well as on the practical and the planning and the policy side, can put our heads together and see whether we can contribute to the global goal with a deltas, a global goal on adaptation to climate change. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samuel. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So now comes a tricky part. We have Mr. Peter Odengo speaking here. He is the coordinator of the Kenya Delta Alliance Wing. And he's supposed to be here, but he missed his flight because he didn't get a visa. But he's online. So Peter, are you with us?
Yes, I am with you.
Great. We don't see you. Do you see us?
I see you, I listen to you,
Great.
And you can see me.
Wonderful.
Yes.
I have one big challenge for you. You have to stick the time. It's very limited. So you have 10 minutes, Peter. Can you do that?
I can try.
Okay, good luck.
Great. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me and also give this keynote address. Let me take this opportunity to thank the policymakers from the government, the students, the academicians, the practitioners, the scientists, ladies and gentlemen. Today is a very great moment for us, for the guys that have been working on the deltas, and for the people who have failed to deliver the resilient deltas as at now. Indeed, we are here today because of the past failures. We are here today because of the failures of the designs, the thinking, and what we needed to have done in the time of climate change. The theme of the conference, very, very important, facilitating the dialogue about the future of our deltas, where millions of people reside, and at the risk of disappearing because of the humanity. It is at the right moment in the history because the mankind, after the COVID-19 pandemic, we now have opportunity of what we call Build Back Better, greener and resilience. The delta should be the first to pick this. And why is this? Because we are glaring on the impacts of the climate change has been mentioned in terms of how the ecosystems are disappearing. We need to adapt. We need to mitigate. We need to build the new systems that supports equality, equity, inclusiveness, the systems approach, not short, not medium, but the long term. The challenges are the skills that we have today is not will not, if not change, will not take us to what we need for the redesigning green resilient, the deltas for all for tomorrow. Rapid urbanization, where the population is burgeoning, creeping into the sensitive ecosystems of the deltas, is our challenge today. How to deal with it is our responsibility today. How to move to the next level is our responsibility. But let me just take you through a piece of my slide to see very briefly how we need to do things, what do we need going to the next level in this case. We will definitely see that the deltas are our homes, and it is the nest for habitat for many, where the rivers and the water sediments which have been said are. Water is life, and that is where it is. But the coastal problems that we are facing today only need the scientists have to demonstrate that more sustainable deltas-based development, policies, legislative frameworks, the spatial and land use planning, the new tools such as strategic environmental assessments, the social assessment, the life cycle system can help to respond to this. But why must we move to this direction of redesigning? It is because of the uniqueness of these local areas where deltas are, their state at the current scenario, and then the national significance and the position of the distinct natural, agricultural, and cultural heritage that the deltas portend today. They provide home species for everything, but these are the fabrics of the life for the future. The indigenous people, the food for humanity, the green collar jobs that we have to generate will only come from the well-sustained management of delta. The challenges that the deltas, for example, in Kenya, where I come from, where we have been working in the Tana Delta, poverty, inequality, lack of transparency and accountability, the climate change which has been alluded to by my predecessors, the speakers here, continue weak private sector investments that degrade the systems, and the vulnerability of the economy to internal and external shocks are the things that the design of the future need to put into control. But what do we need to have these sustainable pathways as the intellect that the community, the society, the world is looking at us? One, we have to have new design tools. The academicians, the masters, the PhDs, the professors, who we sometimes say deputy gods, have to come out now that we need new methodologies. We need a nested-based response system for our delta's ecosystem. We need to have a valuation of the delta's natural capital, to have a monetization which does not mean that they have to be commoditized in a stock market, but to show that the deltas are not demon sites, they have the value. We have to innovate and apply those rigorous sustainable paths. Modern deltas policies, the current policies will not solve the deltas problems of tomorrow. We need new regulation, we need new strategies, we need this new legislative framework. And as time is running out, the new capacity have to be developed to develop end-to-end, back-to-back, the blockchain approach, where we need to take the deltas to the highest level with the higher level. Financial resources. You cannot redesign when you don't have resources to implement the designs. Those planning special that are needed. We've seen it in deltas. Plans are lying on the tables. No money. We need to look at significant resources, not for short and medium, long term. And of course, the new delta governance system has just been alluded. We need to have a global, regional, and local delta management governance system, which takes locally and vertically. But remember, as I leave this, that business as usual is not welcomed in the deltas of tomorrow. And anybody thinking of the designs of the past, the designs of the current, we will not fail with you. All we need a new paradigm shifting in the design, new green resilient deltas with human and ecosystem phase. And of course, emerging challenges can be surmounted. Urban population growth can be halted. Biocultural diversity can be taken into the design, and the people's livelihood support system can now be recognized within the stewardship role of the Delta's expert that I now know is sitting here with their areas of jurisdiction and the new areas that will be. Others will be like geopolitical settlements. We need a global geopolitical settlement within the UNF systems, as has been said, to respond to this. We need to identify the Delta stakeholders. We need to replan the existing one, but no one should be left behind in responding to the Deltas. And the Delta capacity plan must be there. In a final slot, new pathways have to realize that unprecedented impacts of climate change in disproportionate effects for the deltas, the ecosystems, will affect the delta's poorest and most vulnerable communities, which rely on them. We need to mitigate, we need to adapt, but we need climate finance, and that the GCF, for example, provides an opportunity for this, and we need to rethink of how we can tap those resources in scale to respond. And of course, development will always go to the deltas, but we need to have green investment as a key ingredient to stimulate and generate the delta economy. New policies are being sorted out, new resource mobilization, academic curriculum for the universities, as has been mentioned by my predecessor, is great. But finally, good governance system, transparent, effective, and accountable is the hallmark. And this is what we have done within our Tana Delta. We have mobilized it. It is a little bit thriving for the challenges of yesterday, but we are facing, together with you globally, that we now have to move jointly, coordinated, and in a new thinking, higher level thinking to respond to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. You're really amazing. You managed to stick to the time. Really great. So we have now a few minutes break. We have to install the chairs here and for the round table. So a few minutes, please.